Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sue Daley. I'm Director of Technology and Innovation at techUK, and it's my pleasure to be the chair for this conversation today about cloud future and what next generation cloud infrastructure is going to mean for industries of tomorrow and Industry 4.0. We've got two amazing speakers here today to talk about this really broad but fascinating topic. I'm going to ask them both to introduce themselves and then we'll kick off the discussion. Without further ado, Kate, great to have you with us. Can you introduce yourself and your role perhaps and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kate Smaje, I'm a senior partner from McKinsey based out of the UK, and I lead McKinsey Digital for us globally, which includes all of our capabilities around things like cloud and broader technology and AI.
Oh, brilliant. Really great to have you here
Thank
in
you.
person as well. This is so exciting. Dom, great to see you again.
Great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
About you.
Yeah, my name is Poloniecki, and I'm the General Manager for Nutanix in Western Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa. So we're a cloud software company, and we help clients deal with exactly the issues we're talking about today. What does the cloud of the future look like? How do we deal with hybrid, multi-cloud, digital transformation, and all the associated issues and benefits and everything else that comes with that.
Brilliant. Two amazing speakers, I'm sure you agree, but also we were all slightly overexcited because this is the first time we've done a physical event, isn't it? So it's brilliant to have you here at cogX. So thank you so much for being here. So we're talking about the future of cloud and what it means for Industry 4.0 and what the future may hold. But perhaps before we think to the future, perhaps let's just take a moment to reflect on where we've come from in the last, 16, 18 months. And be interesting to see what you both have seen in terms of changes and business approaches and adoption and usage, particularly, of course, of cloud adoption over the pandemic and what we've seen. Dom, do you want to kick us off? What have you been seeing?
Sure. Well, obviously, it's been extraordinary, whatever it is, 16 months for everybody. And the first thing I've been asked this question a lot, as you can imagine, the first thing I say is, to everybody watching and there today, particularly those IT leaders and the suppliers and partners that have been helping customers through this, is to commend everybody for getting through this. And that is to ensure their own companies remain operational, continuity of service for their customers. And frankly, keeping the global economy alive in the last 18 months. And actually, yesterday, I was looking through the honours list, the Queen's honours list, because loads of people honoured for vaccination programs in the NHS, and rightly so, of course. And I was just looking, who in technology has been honoured for keeping the economy alive. So that'd be my first observation, and maybe I'll come back to what I'm seeing going forward as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, it really has been, in my mind, cloud has helped keep us all digitally connected while we've been physically apart. I mean, would you agree, or what have you been seeing?
Yeah, hugely so. I think we've shone new heat and light on what it means to be in the cloud in the last sort of 16, 18 months. And it takes different forms for different companies, right? So for some, it's been about having greater flexibility in this period of time. And, as business leaders have had to ask new and different questions of their businesses and look at data in different ways and so on, and do that at speed, it's allowed them to do that. And we've seen a big divide almost between those that were, let's call it cloud proficient, even if it's not sort of fully there yet, cloud proficient, before and during the pandemic, and those that weren't. And I think it's increased that gulf. And for others, it's been about resilience. Have I been able to, overnight switch everybody to remote working? How's that actually, panned out as technology has sort of subsumed our lives, shall we say, over the last 16, 18 months. So I think people now talk about it in a way that is more connected with how the business works.
Yeah. And that kind of takes us seamlessly on to thinking about perhaps where we're heading. And I suppose at techUK, we've kind of seen that there were a lot of organizations who are still thinking about cloud or doing more with cloud, who kind of went, right, we just have to do it, right? So they've kind of moved forward, which makes me think, what's the strategy, what's the approach that organizations are going to take for the next step, and what happens next? And I'm interested in, perhaps Kate would just kick off with you in terms of the strategy that businesses are taking. Are you seeing it, and do you think it will be kind of perhaps where we were before around lifting and shifting, or more data, more applications to the cloud? Or is it about how cloud can drive real business transformation, digital transformation going forward. What do you see?
Yeah. And there's a disconnect here between what do I see and what would I like to see. And I think the unfortunate reality is there's actually not that much strategy at the moment around how to think about cloud. We did a survey not long ago of about 40 different, just over 40 different boards, and asked them the question about how what is their strategy for cloud? What level of discussion do they have in the boardroom about, about these topics? And actually found that a third weren't even having the conversation, right? Just doesn't even bubble up to board level around this. Of course, management's doing a ton of stuff, but it's not bubbling up to board. So my first point, I think, would be, I guess, a bit of concern that it's not more strategic today. Now, where do I see that going from here? Then I guess my optimistic sort of center comes to bear. And I think what we'll see is much more attention on, how is this really linked with business strategy? So not cloud for cloud's sake, not the next IT, iteration and someone saying, oh, why have we not modernized more? But much more intrinsically linked to how the business value will be created. So, if I'm a retailer and I know that personalization is going to be, core and front and center to what I need to do over the next few years, well, how does cloud help me to do that?
Yeah.
Right. If I'm an oil and gas company and I've got to put AI at the heart of how I, decide to increase mine throughput, well, how does cloud help me to do that? So I think we'll see that. And then I think we'll have to see more attention on the economics. There's a lot of push towards just sort of saying, well, go to cloud. I've got to do it. I wasn't there. I'm going to do it now. And I think we're going to see, and already seeing, a lot of companies pause and say, hang on a minute, did I go too far, too fast? Have I really thought about what the economics of this look like?
From what this is costing the business on a day-to-day basis?
Exactly. On a day-to-day basis and, as it projects forward. Right?
Tom,
yeah, I completely agree on the cost piece, which I'll come on to. But I think, we're going to still see, like it or not, whether there's a strategy or not, more rapid adoption and faster growth in cloud. It's massive as a market. It's $330 billion market, and it's still growing 21, 22, 23% year over year. So it's huge. To your point, Kate, I see the economics question coming up a lot. Different survey, not yours, that I read from Flexera about 2021 State of the Cloud, found that of the 750 cloud global leaders they spoke to, 31% of them are spending now over $1 million a month on cloud.
Wow.
And that's up from 20% the year before. So it's got to be a big focus on, is that a good use of money? And the same survey found that they thought 30% of that spend was wasted spend. So there's more to do around optimizing, etc. I think the other piece on top of strategy is data, and I guess you touched on it about AI and specific use cases, is that there's going to be so much more data generated, but now in different places. So on premise, in the cloud, and much more at the edge.
Yes.
In terms of IoT, and I think forecast is, we'll see in the next few years 50% or more of the data being produced at the edge. So it's about, with all that complexity of the data and trying to unify all that data so you can get the insights that you described, Kate, is how do I bring all that together? And that's going to bring some more challenges as we go forward, but opportunity as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think our next session, which is coming up at 1, is around edge computing. And I think that's going to talk a little bit about the relationship between edge and cloud. We're seeing that as a conversation at techUK more than we've ever seen before. So that seems to be where the thinking is going, particularly when you put the kind of autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, smart city agenda, and you put all this together, and what does that mean? But thinking about the kind of business point of view, and perhaps from a technical point of view, because Dom, I'd love to know, we hear a lot about businesses talking about cloud first, right? And are you still hearing that? Is that the approach that organizations are taking, and is that the right approach?
Well, I guess in part, Kate's talked to that about the board level. So perhaps yes, but without a strategy behind it. But I think my perspective, our perspective at Nutanix is, it depends what you mean by cloud. If by cloud first, that's synonymous with public cloud, I would say the answer is no, in part because the economics. If by cloud first you mean by cloud as an operating model, then I think the answer is yes. And I think that the hyperscalers have done an amazing job in only 15 years old, basically, was the first inception of AWS, and now a 330 billion market, of actually driving the other vendors in the data center space to actually up their game and bring that cloud experience and some of those cloud services everywhere, not just in the public cloud, not just on-prem, but also, also at the edge. So seeing loads of innovation there. And I think there are some really recent examples of where public cloud, if you describe that as cloud first, is not necessarily the strategy. A good recent example is Dropbox, who famously or infamously drove a repatriation strategy, bringing stuff back on premise and optimizing at the same time, and driving significant saving, doubling their gross margin as a consequence. So other examples, and I think we might come on to security, where there are security reasons where public cloud might not be the right thing. DWP is a good example, where they've recently extended their contract with Crown Commercial Hosting for certain data, certain applications that just can't go to public cloud. So I think, long answer to your question, but if cloud first means cloud as an operating model, yes. If it's synonymous with public, then no, for a number of reasons.
I wonder as well, I think, because I'm totally in your camp on this too, I think just the term cloud first, as it's sort of bandied around like buzzword bingo, is actually dangerous, right? It's not even whether good, right, or wrong. I think it's quite dangerous, because there's not enough understanding yet, exactly to your point, about what that means. And, as we see companies make some of these decisions, you have to be really, really clear about, well, which workloads, first and foremost. So exactly to your Dropbox example, heavily storage intensive workloads, it's not clear that is entirely right to be 100% on cloud. Equally, what does the architecture of the applications, the platforms and so on that you're making the move across? Because unless you've really thought about the changes to that architecture, you could spend inordinate amounts of money without really consciously thinking through it. So the re-architecting is the second sort of determinant. And then the third is actually, say, operating model. Unless you change the way you do your testing environments and so on as you make those moves, it's not entirely clear. And so the companies that we see sort of go out and say, we're cloud first, the nuance that sits underneath that is really, really important to get right, both technically and strategically in that context.
And Dom's right. I mean, I would add, I think you had four. Fifth one would be security as well, in terms of, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But just before we move away from that kind of approach, because for organizations that are born in the cloud, whatever you want to call it, that's easy. For those that are not, then legacy infrastructure and legacy issues still come up time and time again. I know they do in our conversations as well. But Dom, are businesses struggling with that? How do you get that?
Yeah, right? I think there will always be some legacy. Right? Help customers coexist between modernizing what they have, moving into the cloud and into multiple clouds,
and understanding that you can do that, right? It's not a one size fits all. It's not black or white. It can do that, right? It works.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes back to some of the cost models we've talked about, and that's the benefit of the growth we've seen is that customers have been able to see what that flexibility and agility can give, particularly when you're bringing new services to market. We've seen some amazing examples in, for instance, financial services, but as we've discussed, actually in some cases that's cost prohibitive. So we're seeing in the technology lines in companies is much more focused on how do I make sure that my applications, my data, my VMs, my containers, whatever it is, are portable, so that through the life cycle of an application, we can make the right economic choice about where that application sits.
So being agile and be flexible and being able to adapt whatever strategy, that seems to be a key thing. Is that, Kate, what you're hearing or what you're seeing from your
very much so. Look, it's a very dynamic space. I don't think
the cloud market itself is changing tremendously, isn't it?
Exactly, it is. And I think the folks that will win out of this are the ones that actually do have the visibility to understand how they're spending, what choices that they've made, how they're incentivizing developers and so on to actually develop in the right way on in the cloud. So I don't think it is a one size fits all by any stretch of the imagination. I think those that understand the nuance and then can track and pivot where that nuance changes are the ones that win.
And we've got a question actually coming in, which I want to kind of bring in to this, because if we think about how organizations get this right, we have a question around what's the panel's perspective on costs, and we've been talking about those, but also in the environmental aspects, and it says such as green AI. But of course, there is a conversation around the move to cloud computing and perhaps the sustainability of the climate change impact. This is something we're doing quite a bit of thinking and work on at techUK, because there's a lot of arguments there for how a move to cloud can help organizations reduce their carbon footprint, reduce their energy costs. But I'm wondering, Kate, is that becoming part of the conversation you're seeing, either from a green AI point of view or from a cloud point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. Not least because I think it gives you the impetus to challenge historic ways of doing this and so on. So no, we definitely see that front and center in the debates. And in some ways, it's one of the things that I think is pulling the cloud debate into the boardroom, because the boardroom is absolutely discussing sustainability right now.
Really?
And therefore, if this is one of the levers, one of the means to really make a step change around that, the two for me go hand in hand. Right?
That's interesting. And it's going to be something we're going to have to talk more and more about as an industry, right, Dom?
Yeah, and I think again I see it as an enabler for that change and improvement. Just I guess at a technical level, just by virtue of moving to more shared infrastructure, you're generally going to get better utilization. Some of the storage technologies associated with public cloud or private clouds means you're getting a lot more compression at storage level, which basically means that you can put more into fewer servers and into fewer storage arrays, and therefore collapse the amount of racks you've got for running the same workload. So definitely, it is driving the green agenda. And again, a lot of that comes back to how you're architecting applications in the first place to benefit from some of those native services.
It's really extremely interesting that that's now driving that conversation as well, because that helps bring it up to board level. And I wonder, actually, before we maybe talk about security, Kate, just touch on the AI. Is there a link between kind of the AI conversation and the cloud conversation? Is that something you're seeing more of?
Yeah, very much so, because so many of the use cases that AI is being used for requires the level of, particularly on public cloud, but both requires the level of shift across to there to actually get full value out of it. But it's also because a lot of the practitioners who are really, really good in that space are the ones who are challenging, how to think about ML ops and so on around this, which again, all of these pieces, and your point on data earlier, right? All of these pieces are coming together. Yeah. So part of this, I think, is about, the tech community, if you like, really using these different routes in, let's call it, to challenge and to say, hang on a minute, I think there's a better way of doing this. And there's a lot of onus on, I think, all of us as a tech community, making sure that we do voice that.
Yeah. And I'm in my world, and I go out and talk to, or go out virtually, or go out and talk to a lot of people. It's about telling that story of convergence as well, right? Yeah. It's not just cloud, it's not just AI, it's not just edge, right, Dom? It's how all these, we're talking about Industry 4.0 and the industries of tomorrow, they're going to need a little bit of everything, right? But then it's how you bring that all seamlessly together. But the cloud is at the heart of that, in my mind. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's easy to say and really hard to do. And every business now, whether whatever department you're in, whether it's sales, marketing, you talk to finance, HR, everybody needs more data to drive more insights, to deliver better service to their internal or external customers. So, and there's more data than ever, and we all know the stats around that. So the challenge is, how do you unify that data so that you can actually, and a lot of that data, at the edge, which I know you're coming on to in another session, is unstructured, and that makes it more complex. So from a cloud perspective, is how can you create what we describe as a unified data plane, so that you can ensure that the data is in the right place at the right time, and then therefore be able to apply data analytics tool sets to derive that insight for companies. So definitely it's helping, but it's also complex.
Yeah, which is exactly what you need for AI, right? You need the data. I mean, it's I don't like to call data as the oil or the fuel, but it's electricity, right? It's what helps it run.
Exactly right.
It's a fascinating area. It's you start with cloud, but it takes you into so many different fields. But one thing that is across everything is security, right? And you mentioned this when we kicked off, but I think it's important to think about as well. We're talking about cloud and the future and what it means for industries of tomorrow, and we want to encourage more people to use more cloud services, right? But got to do it in a safe and secure way. And we saw last year, of course, a lot of people moving to cloud, which is great. A lot of people using cloud more and more. But we also saw the online threat environment, and the online threats continue to evolve and continue to move at pace. And we're doing quite a bit of work at techUK about how do we help then guide organizations? How do we help business leaders who may have done more on cloud or maybe looking to do more on cloud to, I suppose, not just adopt and use it, but scale up and increase their usage, but in a safe and secure way. So how do we get the balance right between doing more with cloud or scaling up the use of cloud? Perhaps, let's say an organization, Dom, has moved to cloud or has started using more cloud services last year. They want to do more now going forward. Perhaps they see, and we can perhaps touch on this, I see cloud as key to the recovery and the rebuilding and maybe even reinvention of lots of organizations as they look to, what the future may hold. So what advice, how do we get that right? How do you get the message and how do we get the narrative right of you can do more with cloud, but you can also do it in a safe and secure way? I mean, that's a panel in itself, right?
For sure, yeah. I mean, if there's one topic that gets straight to the boardroom, it's security, right?
Yeah.
Probably even ahead of environmentals, particularly when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And clearly there's been some pretty high-profile issues recently. So to name a couple, the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack in Western US, which, in that particular case ended up with a ransom payment of $11 million to actually relinquish that data. And, rightly or wrongly, that payment, was made against the FBI's recommendation. But, when you're running a pipeline that is servicing hospitals and other critical services and you can't operate, then, you need to take some of these drastic decisions. And I guess locally we've had our own NHS WannaCry a few years ago, and all of these are expensive, either from lack of non-operation, ransom payments, or indeed regulatory fines when you're not compliant with some of the regulatory framework. So it's an expensive business, and depending on who you talk to, this is costing the economy anywhere between $30 and $120 billion a year. So it's big. It's a big problem. Now, what can you do about it? I guess the question is probably a few things vis-a-vis cloud. So the first perspective I have is that, by virtue of moving to cloud, your perimeter is broadening, right? So, the old way of, intrusion detection and prevention tool sets, just keep in mind that your perimeter, if you like, that you're protecting is broader by virtue of the complexity that brings. Secondly, that you're not outsourcing the responsibility of security to the public cloud provider. In many cases, you're just consuming their infrastructure as a service, but you're still responsible for compliance and if the data goes missing, it's your problem. And the third the third thing is around ensuring that you've got a way of recovering, right? So on the second piece around kind of compliance, is there are a number of tool sets that can help you assess, are particular environments actually compliant with my regulatory framework and with my, security policies, that can then look at remedial ways of addressing that. On the piece about recovering back, from a strategic point of view, you've got to assume you're going to have an attack or you're going to have some data loss, not if, but when. And therefore, how can I find a way to recover back to a place that was previously unaffected? And there are some great technologies, like object storage, for instance, that give you effectively immutable storage that you write once to, you read many times, it can't be overwritten, it can't be accessed, and so you've got that wind back ability to get back to a better place. And that helps you not fall, I guess, prey to ransomware attackers, because you've got a way back to a place that was once unaffected. So that would be general recommendations.
Wow. I think as well, it's an unfair misnomer of saying public cloud equals insecure. We're a long way on from that place. But I think it also puts a bit of the onus, again, back into the boardroom, maybe around, how you're actually thinking about this as a whole integrated topic. So, one of the questions I hate most is, are we safe yet? in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of migration to cloud, and the answer will always be no. Because you'll never be safe, but you can be safer today than you were yesterday, and you'll be safer tomorrow.
Because there's no such thing as 100% security, right?
Correct. And so for me, this is much more of a risk problem of, are we actually asking the right questions on how we are managing risk? I mean, Dom, you mentioned legacy environments earlier. A lot of the risk is coming through the fact that you do still have some stuff in legacy environments and some stuff in other places, and how you're managing, disproportionately the risk between the two, as well as the human, right? Still, when you look at all of the examples that you mentioned, it is even more a human problem than it is a technology problem. And so, boards can't sort of relinquish the responsibility for really making sure that their people know the risks, understand the choices that they're making, and understand their role to help keep the technology doing as good a job as it can. Right?
And I mean, to your point, Kate, so it's board level discussion. That's great, but that's then got to trickle down. Not trickle, but it's a responsibility. Yes, waterfall down the whole organization, because it can be that, somebody in another department is, lifting and shifting something to the cloud because that is the right thing to do and it makes sense. But then if that leaves, and I'm going to be really untechnical now, sorry, Dom, a port open or a doorway open that allows someone to get into your infrastructure, then suddenly you have a problem, right? So is that training or an awareness, or is that just getting people more to think about how they're using cloud services?
Yeah, and some of the choices they've made, some of the more recent supply chain sort of attacks that we've seen, required perhaps the finance department to ask, well, what's that third party vendor? How does that integrate with my current systems and so on? And traditionally, that hasn't been their purview. It hasn't had to be everybody in management's or even sort of further down the management's view to ask those questions. And now it is.
Yeah.
Right.
But I suppose in one way, if the last, year and a half has shown us, even in our everyday lives, how important cloud services, whether it's, a video call with friends, or whether it's being able to work from home, or being able to take, call center calls from your kitchen. I love ringing utility companies, and then you hear like family in the background, you realize they're in their kitchen. All of this, Dom, has been enabled by cloud, really. Right. So we have a greater understanding, do you think, now of how important cloud is to all of our lives and will be going forward?
Yeah, I think so. And I've seen that in some of the budgets that have been authorized for IT going forward. Sometimes the unsung heroes are now, right at the forefront of organizations, whether it's be to keep the lights on, as we described, or help deliver some amazing new kind of born in the cloud web-based services that ordinarily in a big, let's say, financial services organization might have been a 3-year program. Actually within months they're spinning up new services like and making those available. And it's actually that's been enabled by cloud, and also not necessarily pushing for perfection that may have been kind of the strategy of the past, because look what we've been able to do because it's been necessary, right? So it's been an amazing time.
Do you think that speed and that pace that we've seen, and question to you about Dom first, do you think that pace and that speed that we've seen over the last year and a half will continue? Do you think that's going to set the pace now for what happens next?
I certainly hope so, because we're in that business, aren't we? But I suspect so. I think there's going to be some shifts of where those priorities are. But as I said, from what I'm seeing from a budgeting perspective, it's certainly going to see continued investment and acceleration. All the forecasters say that at minimum 20% year-over-year growth in that cloud spend. I think the question is going to be kind of where we started is, are we getting the return on that investment, and how do we optimize, that spend, and is it deriving real business benefit, for the organization?
That's the key. That's going to be driving it, right, Kate?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think companies are going to have to ask some of the tougher questions around, okay, we did this to move fast. Are we now sure that it's all the right set of decisions?
Yeah. So we're obviously having a fascinating conversation. Please do, if you've got questions, so do bring them through. I'm sure I was supposed to have mentioned that before. Apologies. I've got one last question for the panel, but so please do, if you've got any questions, please do keep them coming in. We've had a few already. I'm trying to kind of keep an eye on that and keep an eye on you guys at the same time. It's all the new world of hybrid, right? So I suppose just thinking about the future of cloud, right? That's what we're talking about, and what we think the future of the cloud market might look like. I'm really intrigued, given your views of UK or even globally, what you might see happen next with the cloud market and the cloud industry, either from an industry point of view or from an adoption deployment. And I'm going to be really horrible and say any predictions. I hate it when people ask me that. Like, don't hold me to anything and let's see what happens, but any predictions for what the future might hold? Kate, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I don't know if this is a prediction. I'm not a fan of predictions either, but maybe a view of the potential of this market. We did some work last year looking at the sort of the EBITDA impact that we expect to see cloud provide for companies, and we tore down all the different use cases that could possibly come through innovation and so on. We looked at 700 different use cases, and what we found was effectively a $1 trillion opportunity at the EBITDA level around this. And it takes different forms, right? It's the rejuvenate side of things, so just pure cost optimization, make what you do today run better and so on. There's the innovation side of it, of known proven technologies and how they innovate. That's, by the way, the biggest bucket. And then there's all the stuff that you were alluding to earlier, Sue, as well, around how you actually use newer technologies. What this is going to do when blockchain, all the stuff at the edge, right? When blockchain, is more pervasive, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, whatever it may be. All of those use cases are an even higher amount than what we can see. So I don't know, I come at this from a sort of bullish perspective of there's a lot of business value to be created here. Not all will tackle it in the same way, or should, but there is a lot of value that it can unlock if companies can get it right.
Yeah. Dom.
Yeah, I'll probably give a maybe shorter to medium term view, because who knows what the long term looks like. But I agree with that.
Next year,
yeah, exactly. To get it right, but certainly rapid growth expected. I mentioned that survey earlier, Flexera State of the Cloud. So of the 750 respondents there, 90% said that they're expecting, as a consequence of COVID-19, their cloud spend to outstrip their expectations. So it's only going in one direction. I think the things I'm seeing short term, again, we labeled it a little bit, is cost optimization. So a couple of things there. One is, tool sets to enable companies to optimize their cloud spend. Some of those will be available from the hyperscalers themselves, or the third-party tools to look at what does that look like across your entire estate, if you're in a multi-cloud environment, for instance. And there's some native ones that, Spotify is a really good example, where they built their own to do exactly that, to cost optimize. You mentioned incentives. I've seen that as well, where CTOs are saying, hey, let's incentivize the people that are probably closer to the problem, the developers, the engineers, to say, well, actually, what if you actually switched off that workload or optimize that workload? I'll give you a bonus. I'll give you a 10K bonus to say, to show me how you can reduce your utilization by this much. And the reason why that pays off is because, take that example, let's say you're spending $1,000 a month for that particular workload in the public cloud. It gets switched off because actually it should have been retired ages ago. You get a 12K return or 2K return on your 10K. So and that's recurring, because it's always recurring. Yeah. So seeing some things like that. And then I think the other piece, slightly repeating myself, but is around the data piece and just the amount of data, whether it's in virtual reality or autonomous cars, whatever it is. Actually, how do we harness that data? And cloud will be a key part of that. Being able to have a unified data plane that which is again really easy to say and very, very difficult to do, will be core now, because that's about actually really harnessing the benefit of what cloud can bring, in public cloud, on-prem, in private, and at the edge.
Well, it's a fascinating future to look forward to, and cloud being at the heart of it, it's going to be something that we're going to have to continue to talk about and help organizations get it right. But brilliant insights, and thank you both so much.
Thank you, Sue.
I don't think we have any more questions, so
we've covered everything.
We're done. The future of cloud is secure in more ways than one, I'm sure. But Kate, Dom, thank you so much for being with us today and being at cogX and talking through the future of cloud with us. It's absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much. And great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Right, so I think it leaves me to kind of wrap up the next generation infrastructure and Industry 4.0 stage for this morning. On behalf of techUK, this has been a brilliant load of sessions this morning, I know. So if you're coming back, we will kick off again. Now it's time for lunch. So it's beautiful out there, right? So go and grab a sandwich, go for a walk, go and get some fresh air. But be back here at 1, where we are talking about the edge computing. We were just talking about edge with Colby Ranger from Atos, Stephen Patterson from ARM, and Caroline Gorski from Rolls-Royce, talking about their views on edge computing. I will be back to talk exactly about AI and the data center industry coming together with Sims Witherspoon from DeepMind. And then later on, I will be here talking to Paul Stein, the CTO on Rolls-Royce, talking about how hard tech and high tech need to come together as that industry evolves. So some fascinating discussions coming up. But with that, on behalf of techUK, I'd just like to thank Dom and Kate again for a fascinating conversation. And we'll look forward to seeing you all back here to talk about edge computing at 1 p.m. And with that, I'll say thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.